Madam Secretary, do we have any discussion cards or speaker cards, rather?
We have no one.
Well, we have us. No one else who wishes to speak.
No one in the audience.
Great, thank you. Next item, any questions about the agenda from our last meeting?
No, sir.
The action summary?
No, sir.
Could I hear a motion for the consent?
Mr. Chair, I so move for consent.
Thank you.
Second.
Call for the question.
Director Jones.
Aye.
Monk.
Aye.
Scheidegger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Ms. McFarland, could we talk about the Audit Committee charter?
Yeah, let's talk about that, baby.
Yes, Rhonda McFarland, Chief Financial Officer, and I'm having our Controller, Ron Impedrad, join me since
Hi, Ron.
we collaborated on that together. So, as you probably recall, we did discuss this at our last meeting. I did receive one email with a number of suggestions, and they were incorporated into the charter, and as well as the comments that were made at the last Finance Committee meeting. So we're hoping that the Finance Committee feels comfortable recommending this to the full board, but if there's any further questions or discussion, we're here to answer your questions.
Board members? Any questions?
Go ahead, Gary.
No, I've read through the audit committee charter, and I think it fits what we need and is fairly concise in what we're looking at, and I certainly didn't have any questions on it.
Mr. Chair? Good evening, Ms. McFarland. Good evening. Now, just to sum up, to make sure that when one thinks of the reserve account, we're looking at anywhere between 1.5 months, or about 15%, up to 50%. Was that our range?
Yes, but we're going to hold that discussion for the next item. This is the audit charter.
Oh, the audit charter. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I jumped in both. Actually, kill a few minutes because I think I had a question on that. The audit charter, I'm more than willing to do it. I'm just wondering I asked this question 2 weeks ago on this, as to exactly what we are already doing de facto wise as the Finance Committee that would match the description of the Audit Committee, and then what other additional duties would be required. Should this be considered maybe the same people serve on the finance, but should it be considered a separate audit? Because I noticed it had 4 meetings annually, I believe, or it was suggested. So are we going to tag a Finance Committee meeting / audit, or will we be in a separate agendized meeting?
Well, what was suggested by our Finance Committee Chair was to rename this committee Finance and Audit Committee. And we were envisioning that any of the duties that the Audit Committee would need to address would be handled at these regular meetings that we have monthly.
Okay.
And we put down the 4 times a year just as a minimum, but likely there will be more because we typically have 12. So it was not envisioned to be a separate meeting, but that this committee was designated as the Audit Committee by the full board a while back. And so by renaming this the Audit and Finance Committee, or Finance and Audit Committee, we could then, it would be very clear to people that that's the case, that they serve one and the same.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to talk about any of any changes from their current duties? Do you want to address that?
Mainly the financial reporting part, where the Finance Committee reviews the finance reports. That's one of the main duties of an audit committee, as well as, and we've already done that, so there's no addition on that part, but the other main duty is to oversee, kind of act as the overseer the general overseer of the audit process, and you would need to be to approve the audit committee, the audit contract, selecting auditors and approving their contracts and any other non-audit services that they may be providing. So that's probably the other additional duty of that other additional duty that would be added to the current Finance Committee's duties. And essentially, it formalizes the avenue of communication between the auditors and the Audit Committee.
Okay.
And one minor thing that had never been formalized, but because we hadn't really had it happen, but we do have a hotline that employees can call and report what they think is potential fraud. And so that hotline is handled by our HR division, and so we have in the, if any of the complaints are finance related, that they would be directed to the Audit Committee. And I did discuss that with the HR manager, so she's aware that this is going to be the process if indeed anything like that happens.
Thank you.
And if I might add, the way I see this is that the document spells out responsibilities, and those responsibilities will be added to the agenda of the Finance Committee as necessary to meet those responsibilities. That's kind of how I see it occurring in terms of folding into our ongoing operations and responsibilities.
Yeah, and
Does that-
many of these things have been happening all along. This really is a public document formalizing the authority that you have and the oversight that you exercise to make sure that our financial operation is in order.
And it's all in the process of making us more a professional organization in how we're handling the finances anyway. And I just want to remind everybody that this is our first shot at a policy on the reserves, and it is a living document. So as we go along, if we have to tweak it a little bit here and there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. My notes just said concern, what are we already doing de facto wise, and what other additional things would be entailed, and you've answered that. Thank you.
Most of my questions have been answered, and I have had some dialogue with you, so I'm very comfortable. I think this is a great job. As Director Monk just said, this is a start. I think it's a start with something that's good for this department, and I would hope that we would proceed with this and see it as an improvement to our fiscal operations. So how do you?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to research a lot of different packages and programs and everything, and I discussed it with CFO McFarling and everything. In fact, found out that some of the documents that I reviewed, she was the author of originally.
That's right.
As far as definitions and other things go, and I appreciate her input and guidance in helping put this together. So we got a good start, and we rely on you guys all the time to keep us in the loop.
And then a final closing point maybe here is that this is one of the recommendations of our review.
Right.
Audit review. So I see compliance as just a very good check off here on that list of to-dos.
Okay, so I guess our responsibility here is to approve this charter as drafted and recommend that the board accept it and move forward? Is that?
I believe it would be, agree to recommend it to the full board, and it is on the board agenda for board approval.
Okay,
I'll make a motion that we approve the audit committee charter as it's written
Second?
and forward it to the full board for approval.
okay, so moved. Madam Secretary, could call for the question.
Directors Jones,
Aye.
Monk,
Aye.
Scheidegger.
Aye?
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good job.
Thank you for your hard work.
Reserve table.
Yeah, this is a real good start. Let's see. All right, the reserve policy concept.
Yes, as you're aware, we have a separate committee for policies, but in the case where we are looking at, is there any way we can make that bigger? Gosh, that looks small to me. Because this is a financial-related policy, we felt that it was best to come before this committee originally for discussion and input before staff goes through the formal process of taking it to the full board. And I will say that we are also collaborating with the labor. They have made some significant concessions that have allowed us to have a balanced budget. And so we want to thoughtfully include them in this process when we're examining these things. So it is a pretty lengthy policy. It's 10 pages. There's a lot of definitions. There's backgrounds of why, it is best practice to formalize having a reserve policy. You can see up on the screen that we have a number of different categories of policies and they're put into 3 categories. We talked a little bit about this at the last board meeting. Unassigned reserves, which in that category we have the operating reserves, the committed reserves, and these are things that are all defined in the policy, where we have our workers' compensation reserves, our compensated absence reserves, capital replacement reserves, and early extinguishment pension bond reserves. We also have some capital reserves designated in the Capital Facilities Fund and our development fee reserves and debt service reserves. And then lastly, we mentioned the reserves where we have a separate legal trust for our post-retirement medical. And just for illustrative purposes, I went ahead and put some numbers here as far as what the policy says on the minimum and the maximum. And we have minimums in effort to have good financial sustainability, and we have maximums in an effort to never have any more funds than are absolutely necessary. We, let's see.
Excuse me, so you talked about the minimums and the maximums in the document that we received, but you didn't plug the figures in before, I believe. So,
No, we
so
don't,
these
we
figures
don't
reflect
put
those
them,
ranges.
we don't put them in the document because they can change depending on different things. Like, for example, with some of the reserves that are tied to actuary reports, we reference the reports and what information we would pull from those reports to determine the minimum and the maximum. And that can change over time when assumptions change or demographics change and things like that. So we tried to put together a policy that we would not have to continually go back and touch. And I will say that we also realize that these are targets. We are not, in many cases, at these levels, but as our financial situation improves, it would give us an opportunity to ratably, incrementally try to achieve these, but at the same time, keep in balance some of the other needs of the organization. And so we also indicate in here under transitioning to the target reserves that at the end of any year, with any additional monies left over after fiscal year is complete, they would then go into our general operating reserves and be unassigned. And then through the budget process, the board, and I'm sure finance would possibly have additional discussions and recommendations to the board on designating the reserve so that eventually we will be able to get up to the minimums and work our way through the middle.
Chief?
Yeah, I want to apologize for stepping out. We've got some pressing stuff we're working on and trying to get some more grant money. Let me make a few comments, if I may, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the reserve policy. It's very common, and as you well know, and the board knows, is that especially in cities and stuff, they really talk about these reserve levels as goals that they're trying to get to. And I think that's where we're using the word target and goal are synonymous. And what's going to be important as we go ahead and put this together is that we don't necessarily want to get the cart in front of the horse from this aspect. We have worked, as you well know, with labor very, very hard to have them sacrifice and sacrifice and sacrifice. And so what I don't want to do is have the appearance, and we reassured them, Deputy Chief Wells and I, that we're trying to establish this reserve fund where we're going to put money for the next 10 years and there'll never be any other capital to be expended on negotiable type items. And so we assured them that that's not it, but there's got to be a solid target and goal in a period of years that we look at it, building these funds up incrementally and having it allocated. So when we concluded our last meet and confer issues on the contracts on pre-funding retiree medical, when we did the 12% of PERS, we had made it very clear to them that we would involve them in the discussions in regards to adequately funding the reserves, what is a good level to be there. And I just wanted to say that, that they are fully engaged with us on that, and will be helping us as we move forward on this to establish that. So, I guess what I want to make sure is that, we don't end up with some hard, fast, this is where it's at no matter what, and it doesn't allow the board or the administration some latitude on that. So I think the way that Rhonda has this set up really provides that latitude at the end of the year to talk about how you're going to reallocate as a board and in the budgeting purposes.
So Chief, what I think I hear you saying, we're establishing targets in each of these areas, in each of these reserve funds. And those targets reflect percents or amounts at a given point, but there's not a direct timeline to get there. In other words, we're not saying we're at 7% now, we want to get to 15%, next year we're going to get to 8 or 9, and
Right.
that's
I think what we need to do is to sit down and come up with what that time period is that's reasonable. Talk to labor about that so that you've got some buy-in in this budgeting process, and of course at the board's direction, the policymakers, and say, listen, if it's a 15% general fund operating reserve that we need to have, then what's a timetable to get there? Because if you just had a hard and fast that next year or in 2 years we had to have a 15% reserve, well, we could in essence be closing companies, we could be doing all sorts of stuff that would be counterproductive in order to get there. So that's what I hope that clarified.
And I agree with that. I guess my concern is the other side of that is if we're at 7%, wherever we are, and our target is 15%, whatever it is ultimately, and we're at 7% next year and 7% the next year and 6.9 the next year, I mean, is there any sort of, approach or
I think that's going to be the discussions is that as you sit there and you go, we want to get to 15%, our desire is every year not to have it stay the same or go down, it's to incrementally start to increase it. But maybe one of the reserve funds goes up the next year by 100,000. And then the year after that, it's another 150,000. And you incrementally, because you've got a lot of pots that we need to properly finance to spread it out. And so I think that's the thought process. The finance people would love us to wake up on Monday morning and have everything adequately built up to those reserve levels. But Rhonda clearly understands, and we all understand that we've got a variety of stakeholders that we have to work with as we put it together. But from a financial standpoint, I will tell you that Rhonda and I, when we dealt with Moody's, I believe it was, listen, we want to grow these things. Even if it was a little bit and then a moderate bit, every year you want to grow them because that's where those rating companies look and go, well, you're building those reserves up.
And I agree with your statement that we don't want to close engine companies or do something dramatic just for the purpose of reserves. Somehow I think we need to capture that. Somehow I think we need to capture that we're not going to negatively impact operations to meet reserves, and yet, these targeted levels are important to us. And I just think that otherwise it perhaps, in the worst case, doesn't mean anything to say we're setting reserves.
We have no interest in doing a paper tiger here.
Right.
We want to have something that's realistic, that's measurable and achievable. And somewhere between putting it all in on Monday morning and having that 15% reserve or having no reserve, there's got to be a methodology that we'll put together to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, much of the research that I did on it, on the reserve policies, a lot of the policies with other agencies do have a schedule
Yes.
on how those are to increase year after year after year and how much is going in. And some of them have also set aside priorities on which funds have priority over others as they start to build them up. But this gives us a good starting point, and I believe we'll have continuing discussions on how to exactly set up a schedule to be able to move forward on it. But it's a good starting point.
Yeah, I agree, and at least incorporating the notion that we're going to to routinely review these, and at least on an annual basis, see where we are and expect progress. I think that's,
Yeah, with the limited funding and the limited growth in property tax, really what we could call, for the lack of a better term, the recovery that is yet to come. You know, we've got a lot of, like you talk about, priorities of deferred maintenance on buildings and fleet. And what I don't want to have happen is we get locked in strictly on building the reserves at the expense of doing those other issues that we have to do. That, quite frankly, how much have we lost compounded over the last 4 or 5 years? $80-90 million in property tax. Well, that $80 or $90 million wasn't just in services, but in buildings and every other thing, as you folks know better than anybody, the board. And so, you know, we're gonna have some lifting to do, and I think these increments on these reserve funds are gonna be very, very incremental as they go up, so that we can properly rebuild the district and get it back on a solid footing.
yeah.
I concur with everything that's been said. It's, first of all, these discussions that we're having right now is part of our public discussion on this very thing. Nothing's happening on an aside. It's discussion out here.
Right.
And for the, you know, general things of, you know, non-recurring revenue, if we have extra, that might get stuck in here if we don't have any other outstanding bills, that type of thing. Or even if it's very, very, very incremental, at least we put, you know, 0.5% of something into some of these funds, at least we're still building. And that's, the intent is to build it up. Because we're going to end up like so many of us have seen where, oh gosh, we need some money now. Well, we're not going to get these 10 new rigs, and we're going to just keep, you know, baling wire and tape on the engines to keep them running.
Right.
You know, that's the whole point of these things, is to build these things up so we don't have to, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul, but that we have some kind of sustaining fund amount to take care of that sort of issue. The new program, like with the firefighter paramedics, a cash reserve. I mean, everyone, you're supposed to have X amount in your savings, X amount in liquidity. It applies to individual as well as agencies. And in that good faith effort, I'm all for this. It's good timing to get this started now.
And I'll just add to the comments that, you know, for maybe someone listening to this at home, is that we had a very, very difficult time balancing the budget for 2014. And one of the things that helped us, of course, was the concessions by labor that are approaching $11 million per year. But this puts us in a framework so that as the property taxes recover ever so slowly, as the chief mentioned, that we have some idea of the areas that we should be putting reserves into. But there isn't anything right now for us to do that with. So this is in anticipation. So I think that's real clear. If we had it, we certainly would want to have all of these reserves. We presently have just been working very hard to keep our service level to the community as best we can under these dire circumstances we've been in. And we are right now, you know, the chief talked about the cumulative number, but even just the one-year number is big, $19 million, less than our peak number back in 08-09. So anyway, I did take notes on what everybody mentioned, and we'll see about, you know, if these are things that are ideas that we want to either put in the policy or just keep in mind as we move forward with this policy. And then I guess I would seek, you know, direction if you want to see this again another time, or if you want me to work with Chief Hinkie and just take it to the full board as the next, or to the through the policy committee as the next step, which there would be more time for people to make comments also during the policy committee's meetings as well.
Directors?
One comment, Rhonda, when you go through this, looking at the policy versus what you've got on the screen on the descriptions for the funds, you might want to make sure that the description on the screen matches up with the definitions in the,
Okay, we may have made some changes here and there, so thank you. I will
and
make sure.
that those are listed in the
Okay.
policy.
Okay.
Director Jones?
Thank you. Director Monk, I concur. I was just going to ask you if you could email me this format, because this seems a little bit more, what can I say? A little, not more succinct per se, but that shows me the groupings that we're
Right.
dealing with as opposed to this. So if we could align the written report in our finance agenda and have that support this document that we see.
Okay.
And even, I'd like to receive this electronically. Just shoot me a copy, understanding it's in
Yeah.
draft form.
Okay.
But this helps me get my head around the different areas and how many funds we have that we need to pay attention to.
So would you like to see that one more time before it goes to the board, or what would you?
Just,
in
just,
response?
not in a formal meeting. I
Okay.
don't need to see it
Okay.
again.
Okay.
I think it's good to,
And we've
at
already
each
approved it to
step.
go to the board, so.
Are we talking about eventually the final approval of the policy?
No, actually, all we're doing is lining up a lot of the verbiage in our reports.
Okay.
We like the succinctness, the presentability of the slide.
Okay.
And we just wanted the nomenclature here to reflect what we see on the slide.
Well, because I just want to make sure I'm going to have an opportunity to engage the other stakeholders as you guys are putting this together before there's a final vote and they go, well, you didn't even, and I've been gone for 2.5 weeks or whatever. So I think that's going to be important or. Okay, good.
I just
We're
noticed,
it's just discussion.
No,
It's
I
just
know
another
that.
blend.
I was just,
Yeah.
I've been gone, so you guys are catching me up to speed on where we're at here, so.
And I did mention in the staff report that we are doing some things concurrently. So when we meet with the other stakeholders, if there was some, turn in the road, I would bring it back to this group again to be able to make sure that you feel comfortable as it moves forward to the policy committee. But if it's subtle changes, then I would think that we would just move it forward to them after we meet with the other stakeholder.
Well, I think what I hear is that with the comments that you received here, including incorporating this, the slide into it, we're probably ready to go ahead to the policy committee, which I think you would deem to be the next step. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so, and I just want to make sure that we have those other stakeholders on board so that when we make the vote, everybody's there because they'll be answering a lot of questions about it. Okay?
yeah,
One
my
other-
only note, Chief, was on the descriptions. I went down the list, starting to
Yeah,
look
I'll
at
make
those in the
sure that they
definitions.
match up exactly.
Some of them weren't in there and some of them,
Yeah, okay. We'll make
Work
sure
in
that,
progress.
that's why I
That's a
said
good
it's a
one.
living document.
One other comment I want to make, you mentioned again, how we worked with labor to succeed in putting together a budget for next year. There's some good things in reserve policy for labor too. On page 19, my thing went off again. But, it talks about the reserve to assure we can meet employee needs in terms of buyout, vacation, et cetera. I think there are positive considerations in terms of the ongoing operation of the department as well as directly for employees. I think,
Definitely.
if I can get I'm on, thanks. But I just think we need to make sure we point that out.
okay. And I did get some comments
Thank you.
from Local 522 CPA, but I'm assuming that I will probably be getting further comments. So thank you for your help.
Thank you for your fine work. I think, again, another good
This is a
product.
lot.
Yeah, this is excellent. Okay, Mr. Rempedrag. Internal controls progress.
Yeah, members of the
Please.
members of the committee, I'm Ron Empedrad, controller for the district, and I'm here to report the status of the internal control findings by the auditor. In my previous quarterly status report, I gave a detailed explanation of the 18 internal control findings made by the auditor, and we've made considerable progress in addressing those findings. Currently, we have 3 remaining unresolved findings which are addressing. The first audit finding, auditors recommended that we review the capital facilities fees, and at this time, we have received the final report on facilities needs from the district's consultants, and this report details the future capital facilities and equipment needs of the district based on current development activity in the district's area of coverage. The next step would be to cost out these facilities and equipment needs, and then develop a fee or cost per square foot for each development activity. We expect or we estimate that we would be able to finish this process by the end of the calendar year. Sorry. The second audit finding is for us to review and monitor the third-party billing services, mainly the medic billing services provided by Whitman. We are currently in progress of addressing this. We are scheduled to conduct another audit, another site visit next month, and hopefully we should be able to resolve this finding in the next few months. The third audit finding is to designate the audit committee and develop its charter. With the full board's adoption of the audit charter, we can cross this off our list. So in summary, out of the 18 audit findings that the auditor originally had, we've resolved 16, and we are currently in the process of addressing the 2 unresolved findings. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Members?
Numbers look good.
And appreciate the continued work on it.
And I'll be able to give another status report next quarter.
Wonderful. I do think this is terribly important. It legitimizes the audit function and the nexus between having an audit and our ongoing operation. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Legal bills? Any questions? Do I hear
I'll make a motion
oh,
that we pay the legal bills.
there's a good one.
And I'll second that
Moved
we
and seconded.
ratify payment.
Call for the question?
Director Jones.
Aye.
Monk.
Aye.
Scheidegger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Are there any specific agenda items that we want to talk about now for the next meeting, which will be on August 8th?
I think that the biggest thing was getting this audit committee running concurrently with the finance. I can't think of anything else that we had outstanding.
No,
Okay, well then.
that's a
we'll,
big step, so.
Oh, it absolutely is. Absolutely is. And I appreciate again the work that Ms. McFarland and others have done to bring that to us. Okay. Our next meeting is August 8th. If there's nothing else, we'll adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now,